Good afternoon. I want to welcome you all to a very important conversation today, hosted by the Greater Rochester Chamber of Commerce. It's about the issues of race, and it's emanating from starting with what happened in Minneapolis just several days ago. The video, which I think sickened this entire country, and the wounds that opened after that really calls us all to this time to have a conversation and to really move toward change. It's a time for leadership. It's a time to listen, and I don't think we listen very well. And I will say, from my perspective in Rochester and across the country, we often suffer from amnesia. An incident happens, we go on, and then it goes back to the way things were. And I do think we're at a point right now, as a community, as a country, we need change, and we need to listen to the voices that really are impactful and can help us understand, where we've gone off the track, how we get back on. So I just appreciate today's event. We have great panelists here, a great broad cross section of our community. We did invite the RPD chief, Laurent Singletary, to be involved today. He did not take up the opportunity. I think he was busy. So we appreciate Sheriff Baxter filling in right at the last minute. And a law enforcement perspective really is important to have this conversation. So I want to thank our panelists for taking time. Thank our panelists for what you're going to hear is some great, thoughtful, and in many cases just very honest and forthcoming discussions about a topic that maybe some have a hard time talking about. We should not. And I would say this is a start of many, many conversations in the future. I'm going to turn it over to a man who I have enormous respect for, a man who grew up in our city, went to city schools, has served our country as a Marine, 2 combat tours in Afghanistan. Coming back, he is a Monroe Community College graduate. He is a graduate of Yale University. He is one of our executives here at the Chamber, and he is a leader who does not need notes to talk about how he feels or how he thinks. And he has been a force that's coming back here and really leading in so many different ways in Rochester. So he will take it over and lead today's conversation. So please welcome Adrian Hale. Adrian, take over.
Thank you so much for that generous introduction, Bob. I appreciate it. And I'm very, very proud that as a Chamber of Commerce, we're taking the lead in our community by really wanting to have an authentic, genuine conversation about the state of Black America, in particular, the state of Black Greater Rochester, so we can get beyond the questions of what people are doing and really get down to the nitty-gritty of why people are acting, behaving, and thinking in the terms that they are. These are going to be difficult conversations, but I just want to say this as a disclaimer. Everyone that's both listening and those who are engaging as panelists, I want us all to suspend our judgment. Even though there's largely a community of Black professionals on right now, I want us to recognize that none of us speak for the entire Black community. We only speak on behalf of our experiences. And what I'm hoping we do today is treat ourselves with the complexity and sophistication that any group of people deserve when speaking about their experience and what it means to be Black in America in 2020. So I want you all to be honest and genuine about your perspective, your vantage points, and your worldview. We have a really acclaimed list of panelists here that I'm so proud are taking the time out of their busy schedules and days to speak to our membership, members of our board, who frankly are not in the proximity of these problems, who don't engage and see these challenges on a daily basis. And so I think we're going to inform their perspective so that they can be great allies, so they can learn what it is that they need to do to help rectify some of the issues and conditions here in our own backyard, and not be so focused on the national conversation that we neglect what's right in our faces. So I want everyone to suspend their judgments. Please be willing to listen, to hear, to learn. This is not a debate, but more so us trying to build unity through understanding. So those who do have the means to act can act informed, and more importantly, with those who know these challenges in an intimate way. So without further ado, I want you all to get to know our great panelists who are here today to speak and help inform that understanding. I just want to start off with every panelist. I'm going to say your name. I'm going to list some things about you, and then I want you to just take about 5 minutes to talk about how you perceive this moment, give the attendees a little bit of an understanding about who you are, and your worldview and your perspective regarding some of these contemporary issues. So I want to start off with Simeon Bannister, a good friend of mine. We work hand in hand often here. He's the Vice President of Community Programs at the Rochester Area Community Foundation. He's also a community leader. He comes from a very powerful family that has been engaged in this work for quite some time, the Banister family. And Simeon, just take about 5 minutes to talk about your work and your vantage point.
Sure. I just want to start off with a note of gratitude to you, Adrian, for the invitation to be here. When we were kind of coming on before the cameras went live, Chairman Duffy was remarking that he and I initially met actually when I was about 7 or 8 years old, actually at a march that took us to City Hall to talk about these issues. And for context, I'm 38 years old now. So 30 years ago, we were talking about some of the same challenges that we're talking about today. So just as a marker in time about how we think about progress. And I think that leads me really to the observation I'd like to share today and the question that I have for all of us that are gathered. And that question is, do we really want change? Do we really want this community to be different? Are we tired of opening the paper and seeing the same thing? Are we tired of seeing the same kinds of statistics year after year, particularly when we think about those numbers in comparison to cities that are similar to our own? And if we do want change, and if we want meaningful change that erases those negative headlines, if we want meaningful change that ameliorates the suffering that continues to impact large segments of our community, then what it means is that we have got to have a different kind of conversation about these issues. And that different kind of conversation leads us to what I hope, as Adrian kind of alluded to, is a more sophisticated understanding of the complex challenges that we face. One of the dynamics about race, particularly in this country, is that we tend to think of it on an individualized basis. And so our solutions end up being individual, right? We end up talking about things like who has self-sufficiency or not, individual conversation. We tend to focus on the interpersonal dynamics of race, who called who what. But in this community, I would offer that we have to take a much broader conceptualization of these challenges, or else we risk, again, nibbling at the edges of the problem and not actually moving to solve it. Let me give an example of that, if I might. This community right now, our GDP, it's kind of difficult to figure out. Those that travel in these circles know that GDPs aren't typically calculated at the municipal level, but with a little bit of mathematics and you can kind of get to a number. And that number for Rochester, our GDP, if you will, our gross municipal product would probably be a better way of saying it, is about $5.7 billion a year. Right? So that's the GDP for the city of Rochester. Compare that to the region, $58 or so billion a year for our metropolitan statistical area. The reason why this is important is that if you take the budgets for what we spend on personnel for, say, police and fire and teachers and other just municipal workers, so not even including the private sector, what we have in Rochester is that about $500 or so million a year, $500 million, leaves the city of Rochester and goes out to our suburban communities. And why that's important is that many of the protests that we're seeing now are a function of an extractive economy that we have created in this community. And as dollars get siphoned out, it amplifies the challenges that exist in our community. And we know how that happened, right? We know the story. Hopefully, many of you know the story of redlining. Hopefully, you're familiar with restrictive covenants. We're familiar with many of the policies, the choices that have been made that have created this extractive economy. Well, if you suck all the money out of the city, right, is there any wonder why we see crushing endemic poverty in the way that we do? This is not just an individual interpersonal conversation. This is a structural question about literally the underpinnings of our community and the kind of society that we want to live in. And so I would just close by saying that we can certainly speak in some detailed ways when we talk about concentrated poverty. And at the Community Foundation, we've spent a significant amount of the last, almost half decade or so talking a lot about concentrated poverty, because what we have to talk about really is community-wide deprivation in certain segments of our community. And again, this isn't just an individual question of who has self-sufficiency, right? It's a broader question that we need to answer. And if we're going to get serious about this, then we've got to tackle that. And I hope to offer later in the conversation a few examples and some solutions that might get us a little bit closer to that goal.
No, and Simeon, I'm glad that you took it to the economic perspective, because oftentimes I think right now the conversation about structural racism has been marginalized to just policing and community police relationships, when it's actually, infiltrated every component of our society. And I'm glad that you made the conversation already broader just off the bat. I want to just go really quick now to another one of our great panelists, who I have a great respect for. She has really been leading the way and organizing, some of the more recent protests that have been had around the community. She is someone that she's gonna let you know how she feels, and I have a great amount of admiration and respect for Ashley for that. But I want to just introduce you all to Ashley Gantt of the New York Civil Liberties Union, and she's also a civil rights activist. And Ashley, just take a couple of minutes to let everyone know, your perspective, who you are, and what you've been seeing on the front lines.
Thank you, Adrian, for putting this together. I said I didn't want to go after Simeon. I don't know how to follow him up, but I'll just keep it short and sweet. So my name is Ashley. I'm a civil rights organizer. I also work for the American Civil Liberties Union, and I co-lead Free the People Rock, as well as the local Black Lives Matter chapter here with some other dope, amazing brown and Black folks. Literally, I just come to the work with the lens from growing up in the hoods in our community, and also knowing that this economic system that is in America is literally built on the backs of brown and Black people, and we get the bottom end of the stick. Really, my goal is just to dismantle white supremacy one brick at a time. I don't necessarily think that I'm going to do that in our generation, but I definitely want to loosen the chains so that when the generation behind us come, it'll be a little bit easier. I believe in community economics. I think that we all have to help each other out, all have to work together. I don't think that the system is broken. And when I say the system, I don't just mean the criminal justice system, but I mean the economic structure in America. I think it's built on the backs of people of color, and I think it's on purpose. And it's up to us to kind of dismantle that and create a world that we want to live in.
Thank you so much for that, Ashley. And I can't wait to dig into some of the comments that you made so we can start to share understanding, because I think we all use similar language, but I don't think we always share meaning of language. So when you use certain terms, I think some folks have an idea in their mind what they think that means. And I can't wait for us to have a deeper conversation so we can get a shared understanding, so that when we speak, we all know where each other is coming from. So thank you for that. I want to jump really quick to our sheriff who stepped in at the last minute, to echo Bob's point. We did invite the Rochester Police Department. We invited Chief Singletary. He declined our invitation, but we thank you so much for coming on at the last minute, Todd, and being not just a great sheriff, but a great member of this community, and stepping up at a moment where I think a lot of folks are looking for leadership. We've seen examples of leadership all across the country, from chiefs, sheriffs, mayors, you name it. And we thank you for stepping in and filling the gap today by being a leader. I want you to take just a couple of minutes. You're a city boy too, city kid. You're the Jefferson. You right across the bridge from me on Conkin Avenue D on the northwest side. So talk a little bit about your experiences and what's led you to the point that you're in now, and how you feel law enforcement and community leadership can really respond to the demands of the moment.
Thanks, Adrian, and I appreciate that introduction. Proud City School District graduate, so is my bride. This is an opportunity in front of us. I look at, everybody on this panel I've had conversations with, deep conversations, and we've had them since Mr. Duffy was the chief of police, and we had him before that. There's an opportunity in front of us. My heart is broken. It seems like the work we've been doing, the hard conversations, the team police academies, we can go on for a list. I got a list this long of things we've done, hiring practices and all, and recruiting. It's all wiped out. That's how I feel right now. But with that is opportunity to build up. We talked about the structural things that underline most of this, and the poverty and the systemic things. There are opportunities to shake some things up. I'll give you one example that I've been trying to do for I don't know how long, and that's the New York State civil service system. And it's not an excuse of why we are a more diverse police department as a sheriff's office, but I can tell you right now, it keeps us it's systemic. It keeps us in a system that we don't want to be in. For instance, I have a young African-American male that I tried to hire. He was a Marine, Adrian, went off, served his country in Afghanistan. Sounds a lot like you. He missed the testing procedures here in New York. It takes another year for a test to pop up. Even if he scored high enough on the test, it'd probably take a year. So it's about a 2-year hiring practice. He was leaving the Marine Corps, got a job down in South Carolina. His family's entrenched, and we'll never see him back in New York State as a potential police candidate in any agency. That civil service system has an opportunity right now with the people that are on this panel, the reverends I'm meeting with. I met with every African-American legislator the other day. We got an opportunity to change some real systemic things, like opening up the civil service test to give us an opportunity to hire people and diversify, but also a better process of hiring people. So that's just one thing. I'm frustrated. I am angry. I want to arrest a guy in Minnesota. I want to arrest, these people are just, they're tearing us down. And we have to do a much, much better job in recruitment and make sure we know who we're hiring. We got to get rid of people as quick as possible when they show signs, whether it's the first year, the 10th year, or 20 years of their career, show signs of these people you're seeing wearing blue uniforms, my badge that I love so much and the job I hold very dearly, and they're crushing us, and there's zero tolerance for it. And the last thing I'll talk on opportunity, and I'll be more glad to talk later, is every chief of police in Monroe County is engaged in the conversation right now, right? I just left a conference to come to this one with Reverend Stewart, and there was 3 other chiefs of police and a major for the New York State Police on that conversation with Reverend Stewart and having deep conversations. So I think we got opportunity. I think if we stop screaming at each other and stop, talking about nuances, and let's go for what Simeon said, those systemic changes, not only in law enforcement, but in poverty, in opportunities, like the civil service system, that get people in these great jobs, let alone law enforcement. There's other great civil service jobs out there that people are missing because they can't score a 95 on some test that's irrelevant. So I'm looking for them. I'm excited. My heart's broken. I'm angry. But at the same time, there's opportunity. We need to, this is our time, a time appointed for us. So let's see what we can do with it.
Well, thank you so much, Sheriff Baxter. And this is a moment, and I'm glad that you touched on civil service exams, because I think it poses the question around the composition of our policing force. And I think that's a fundamental question when we get back to Simeon's comments about structural and systemic change. So I can't wait to get back to that as we advance the conversation. I want to give Natalie a chance to talk a little bit really quickly. Natalie Knott is with us of the Monroe County Public Defender's Office. She is a career poverty law attorney and a racial justice advocate. Natalie, talk a little bit about your work. I mean, you are definitely a critical piece of the criminal justice system. So talk a little bit about what you see every day, how you got there, and what you think this moment means for you and the institution that you're a part of.
Well, I have a background both in civil poverty law. I represented people who were losing their housing, losing their benefits, and really, really living on the edge of survival in the Finger Lakes community, as well as now representing mostly Black and Latino clients in Rochester City Court. I really like the point that Simeon brought up about the economics of this, because law enforcement and the criminal justice system are not exempt from that extractive process. As a matter of fact, they're one of the leading perpetrators of that extractive process of extracting what little wealth the Black community and the Black community has, and taking that out and either sending it into the court system or the state or wherever it goes. And that happens in a lot of fairly innocuous ways that don't make the news very often, with clients charged with aggravated unlicensed operation. That is a low-level crime, meaning someone's operating without their license, but they don't have a license. Their license is suspended for some reason, and it requires people to make countless trips back to court to check in on how their payments are going. It denies them the ability to participate, to have a license and get in a car and go to work. And you have many Black people in this community who owe thousands of dollars to the DMV, and they have no way of accessing a job to be able to pay that. And that's one of the huge ways in which the criminal justice system participates in that extraction. Additionally, in Monroe County, count the law enforcement organizations in Monroe County. How many are there? There's almost, I believe there's 14 or 15 just in Monroe County. In a county of, what is, I believe it's about just under 200,000 people. There's about 14 law enforcement agencies. In any municipality, the biggest line item on that budget you're going to see is law enforcement. Now, think about someone who's living in Rochester. They are paying taxes that go towards RPD. They are paying taxes that go towards the sheriff's department. They are paying taxes that go towards the state police. That is 3 levels of policing for a pretty small city. That is wealth that is being extracted out of our communities and being sent to something and being used for something that is then going to extract more wealth out of us. I think that we can't underscore that. We can't underscore. We can't diminish that, because that is one of the most massive barriers for the Black community in building wealth. It's clearing fines and fees to government agencies and court fees. We also have people who are losing their jobs because they can't pay these court fees, and so they have a bench warrant issued for them and they're picked up off the street, not for doing anything wrong, but because they couldn't pay money. And that's a real crisis of moral crisis in our community. But beyond that, as a public defender, that the wealth disparity is never. I think one of the starkest examples of that is spending some time and watching criminal court. You see predominantly white people from the suburbs who are being accused of crimes. The statistics show that people, Black people don't commit more crimes. Everybody commits crimes just in their neighborhoods. But you see the overwhelming amount of white people coming to court with their, very expensive paid attorneys, and the overwhelming number of Black people in this court represented by the public defenders. And I'm glad we're here. We're an amazing office. I think, honestly, we are the best defense attorneys in town. And I really pride that, I take a lot of pride in that and in my work. But guess what? The residents of Monroe County are very lucky. We have a very good public defender's office here. However, if you go one county over to Ontario County, or if you go down to Onondaga County, and we can't forget that our Black community here is tied to those communities. How safe we are here is only balanced out by how safe we are when we cross those county borders. So this all ties together. And so if you are accidentally accused of a crime while being in the Finger Lakes or in visiting family in Onondaga County, you are not assured of the same level of representation at all. And in a community that is pretty fluid between the upstate cities of Syracuse, Buffalo, the Finger Lakes area, we don't have people who are staying put all the time. This is all part and parcel of the same problem. But I really think that it behooves us to not just think of the violence inflicted by the criminal justice system as physical. It's social, it's emotional. As a matter of fact, just this morning, I was woken up by cops knocking on my door, claiming that I had called them. I was woken up, I had called no one, but that's how I woke up. I don't leave my house, and I live on Plymouth Avenue. I don't leave my house any single time without seeing a police officer. That has an effect on how people feel about their membership in a community. As a public defender, I chose to live in the 19th Ward because I think that it behooves me to understand the daily experience of the people I represent. And the daily experience of the people I represent is constant surveillance and affirmative interference in their lives by law enforcement. That if you treat people a certain way, they are going to react a certain way. This is true across the board. You put police on every block in Pittsford, guess what? You're going to catch a lot of kids in Pittsford doing a lot of nonsense. And that's exactly the experience of being a Black person in this city. You are surveilled every time you leave your house, every single time, on foot, in a vehicle. You know that you're being watched. You know that every move you make is open to interpretation by people who do not have your best interest at heart. And I think that that's a really important part of the conversation.
No, and honestly, I love that you tied in so many different components that were already kind of spoken of and touched on. You really got deeper, but really towards the end there, get into the attitudinal bias that we have, or that we are the victims of, just as people of color in general, and how that permeates the roles that people play in our society. If it's government administration, if it's judicial, if it's law enforcement, if it's a hiring manager at a company, if it's a real estate agent selling you a house, if it's a landlord renting you a home, that this pervasive bias that we're all collectively victims of, whether we went to Yale University or the Collins Correctional Facility. There is no differentiation when you are Black in America. There's a whole heap of assumptions that you inherit by birth of who you are. And I think that that's something that we definitely need to touch on a little bit, because I think that the root of all of this is really in that. It is really in the hearts and minds of our people, because we are our community. So I'm glad you tied a lot of what was already talked about together, and you brought a new component to the conversation, Natalie. Really quick, I want to give another gentleman who's been on the front line of this a time to introduce himself. Mr. Anthony Hale, who has done so much work in this community. I'm telling you that from his time as a gang specialist at the city of Rochester with the Pathways to Peace program, he's also the executive director for Book Bags Express, which does a number of good things, from scholarships to kids to book bags for young people going to school. He's a community activist, and he's currently the dean of students at Vertis Charter School for Young Men. I want to give Anthony Hale just the time to really speak about this. And one thing I'll just say about Anthony is, I mean, you cannot find anyone in this community that I think is, you know, the communal older brother, the communal mentor. I mean, this man really has his hands in this work. So Anthony, take just a couple minutes to tell everybody who you are, what you do, and how you've been experiencing this moment.
Thank you for that introduction. First, I'd like to thank the panelists for being on and allowing me to be a part of this, Adrian and Bob in the chamber. What we see in this moment, in my opinion, has never been experienced. We've seen rioting, looting, protests, marches, demonstrations at the national level, but never at the world level. Where the world is on board, and as I keep stating, that under one banner and chanting with one voice, Black Lives Matter. I think that's very dope in itself. And I think, to Simeon's point, do we really want to see change? And bringing about change is galvanizing the community, and not just any community, but we have to home in on the community that's mostly impacted by these disparities and racial nuances in our community. We can't leave those folks out. And I think a lot of times we end up doing that. And for me, you know, I think everybody touched on every area that needs improving. But the goal is, as Ashley stated, one brick at a time, to uproot systematic institutional racism in our community and in our nation. Law enforcement is a component of this, but however, there's so many factors that play a part. And it's important that the Black and Brown community, particularly the Black community, get together and keep having these conversations. I think whether or not you agree on everything, it's fine. Just having a conversation, keeping it in the forefront of our minds, letting people know that, you know, this is not something, a one-hit wonder. This is not something that's just going to die down. As I said last week, the governor said, you all are worrying about the rioting, worry about why they rioting. I think that's important. I think that's very important. And understanding the community is tired, and they're seeking, they're asking, they're wanting leadership to step up. They want the faith-based community to step up, the civic leaders in this community to step up, and we have a task to hold those people accountable as well as ourselves in order to resolve this matter at hand. So, you know, for me, as Sheriff Baxter said, I'm angry, I'm heartbroken, but I still want to work through this and work with everybody. Thank you.
No, thank you, Anthony, so much for just giving us your perspective. And this, my last introduction for our panelists, who might be last, but she's certainly not least. She needs no introduction. I mean, you know her for her singing, you know her for her commentary, you know her because she is going to exude love no matter what environment she's in. I'm talking about Danielle Ponder, who has a number of titles and responsibilities and roles in our community, but right now she's the Special Assistant Public Defender for Diversity and Inclusion at the Monroe County Public Defender's Office. Danielle, share just a little bit about, you know, what that role is for, you know, how you're taking in this moment, how things are affecting you, and after you, I want to start the conversation.
You're on mute, Danielle.
You're on mute still.
You would think the musician could get the sound issues together, right? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we'll give you a pass on that.
Thank you. Don't tell anyone. So the diversity inclusion officer is really to work on recruitment within our office, to work on inclusivity and the culture of our office, but really it's also doing community engagement at the Public Defender's Office. We want to be more connected to our community. I just so happened to get this position in a very interesting time. So it's turned into a lot of different things, but really trying to make sure the community knows that we support the Black Lives Matter movement at the Public Defender's Office. And I think, you know, I'm pretty sure it's the only position like this that exists in a Public Defender's Office in Western New York. So that's my professional title, but I want to speak to you as an artist because I want to tell you straight from my heart without thinking about my job description that this has been one of the most painful experiences. These past couple weeks have been trauma for me. Last night, I had a nightmare. I had a nightmare about the Middle Passage. I couldn't sleep all last night. And the reason I want to share that with you is because I can so see those faces so clearly. And I think about how horrific and disgusting it is that Black folks have been in this country for over 400 years and still are treated as second-class citizens and still are unable to get respect. But what I also got from that dream last night is we have to be honest and we have to start telling the truth and we have to stop sugarcoating things. Every single person on this panel knows that racial disparities exist in the criminal justice system. I don't have to give you a list. Sheriff Baxter, if he's in the jail, he knows that they're mainly Black and brown folks sitting in his jail. So I don't have to tell you all those things. I'm more than willing to. But I want to share this with you. We talk about doing institutional changes or creating systemic changes. I said this to Mike Mazzio. The people came up with the Police Accountability Board and he was against it. That was an institutional change. I said this to Sheriff Baxter. The people came up with bail reform and he was against it. That was an institutional change. So I'm unable to sit here and I say it with love and I say it with understanding, but I'm unable to sit here and have people say, yes, we need systemic change when we have been trying for systemic change for 400 years. And we have had people who are supposed to be allies or who say they support it come against that systemic change. And it's not to pinpoint anyone, but the time is now. The time is pivotal to be really honest and say, you know what, Mr. Baxter, I'm gonna still talk with you. You got a great personality and we can hang out, but I'm gonna tell you the truth, that Black people have sat in jail. I'm working on writing up a case right now of a man who sat in jail for 6 months. And finally, when the video came out, he didn't commit the crime, but he couldn't afford the bail. And even under our current bail statute, robbery in the second degree, he still would have bail set on him. So listen, I work in the institution, and Adrian, you can ask me all the questions because myself and Natalie, we know the inner workings of this. We get to see the innards, the nasty part of the system, and I'm more than willing to shed light on it. But I want to speak truth to power continuously for those Black folks who were stolen from Africa, brought into a ship, in the horror and the stench that I saw in my dream last night. I'm going to continue to push back in the most respectful way I can say. But if you want institutional change and you are the head of an institution, tell me what you're going to do. And that has to be more than hiring Black people. That has to be more than doing youth services. How are you going to radically change your institution? Because Black folks are saying that the police are killing us. The police our communities in ways that they do not police any other community. Pittsburgh doesn't have proactive policing. Greece doesn't have proactive policing. I looked at the data, so y'all can also know I'm a lawyer as well. I looked at the data. 1/3 of the calls from RPD, or 1/3 of the arrests from RPD, were officer initiated, meaning no one called them, meaning RPD just decided to step out on folks. And you know what they're more likely to get when they arrest or when they stop and frisk someone? They're more likely to get marijuana. They're more likely to recover marijuana than anything else. Drugs don't even come to, guns don't even come to the top of the list. So like Jay-Z said, the police department is engaging in a stalking-like behavior in Black communities, and they do it nowhere else. And if you are not willing to admit that and not willing to change that structure, what are we talking about?
Amen.
Danielle, I thank you so much for opening up the transparency, the honesty. I want to give the sheriff, did you have something that you wanted to say, or did you want to respond to her remarks before we open it up? Because I really want to start back at something that Ashley mentioned. She used the term white supremacy, and before we start to really engage with that ideology and talk about the way that it has operationalized itself and manifested in our society, I just wanted to give you the floor, and if you wanted to respond to the comments of Danielle.
Yeah, thank you, Adrian. I appreciate that. And Danielle, you and I have had these conversations, and I hope we continue to have these conversations. And to be quite frank, I wasn't against bail reform. I was against portions of it. And I think we should be able to have those conversations, say, these are the portions I don't agree with. Doesn't make me 100% right or wrong. I'm just saying I can express my opinion from a public safety officer also, and we can debate that back and forth, and maybe I learned something. That's a great point of view, and you learn something from my point of view. I may not change your mind, but I think having the frank conversations, having the open dialogue, running across Mr. Hall over there, or running across Daniel over here, and having those conversations are very important, that you can understand why, from a public safety standpoint, certain parts of bail reform made me nervous. And I think that's my job description to express that. I'm a public safety official. With that being said, you've asked the question. I mean, we can change policies, we can change procedures, we can look at general orders. Minneapolis, all these other cases, that's freaking darn right murder, right? That's a cop with all that authority in a uniform committing murder in broad daylight. There is a systemic problem at the heart of some of these officers and deputies that we need to look at. So, people keep on saying, what do you want to look like a year from now with this opportunity put in front of you? Man, if I could pierce the heart of 2,000 police officers in Monroe County, our sphere of influence, if I could pierce their heart, let them walk in your shoes for a minute, and please walk in our shoes for a minute, learn. We got to learn each other. And I think, we can put all the policies and procedures in place. Same thing inside the Monroe County Jail. You mentioned it, there's people incarcerated in that jail that don't need to be there. I run the jail. There's people in that jail that don't need to be there. We could talk about systemic racism and putting them in there with low-level charges that they can't I think it was Natalie spoke on it, that they can't afford the bail or can't afford, you know, AUO third, aggravated unlicensed third, and they're sitting in jail. Who's winning on that one? You and me are paying $130 minimum a day to incarcerate them. The taxpayers out in the suburbs, no one's winning. But what can we do an alternative to that to get that person to a job? You know, I've seen AUO thirds in my life. The person was stopped for a one headlight, or person was stopped AUO third because they couldn't pay their suspension or whatever, but they're on their way to work. You know, trust me, the chief law enforcement officer in Monroe County has empathy and compassion, and we'll have these frank conversations with people like, this doesn't make any sense, people. Same thing leaving the Monroe County Jail. Are we setting them up for success when they leave? Are we working together with you guys, the community organizations, and getting people the job training, job placement, jobs before they leave the Monroe County Jail if they're incarcerated with us? You know, I don't know how much more you're hearing a man and a person with empathy and compassion that wants to make changes, but I also want to stand up and be able to say what I believe in also. And if it's a public safety issue, that's my job description. Hey, just listen, here's my point of view on that public safety concern. It doesn't mean I'm 100% against or 100% for. It just means I'm expressing my opinion too, which is part of my job description sometimes when it comes to public safety. Go to marijuana. Adrian, I'm taking all the time, but marijuana, get it on the books or get it off the book. As a society, we need to make a decision. On the books or off the books, but this middle ground thing that we keep on playing. All right, so some of it's illegal, some of it's legal, and now you can, man, let's make a decision as a society, make a law as a society, the way it's supposed to be made, and let's execute the law the way it's supposed to be done. And then if law enforcement has a function in that, but this middle ground thing with just marijuana is a simple example. People are totally confused in the public. Is it legal, illegal? Can I drive with it? Can I drive with it? I'm like, this is not the way it's supposed to be done. We're supposed to be a little more clear with our laws than even just marijuana laws. So I'm sorry, but Danielle, you know I love you, and I'm willing to have those conversations anytime. But allow me to have my conversation too, and don't think I'm throwing your ideas under the water. You know, under the
Cash bail is not a public safety issue. Cash bail is a racist and classist system.
I would get rid of bail tomorrow. I would love to you and I had this conversation.
Against bail reform.
The cash bail right now. It absolutely makes no sense that some young man doesn't have $50 and someone else does have $50 and commits the same crime, and one's incarcerated. It should be based on some other facts if we're going to hold that person pre-trial, but it shouldn't be based on how much money you have in your pocket. Irrelevant. I agree. I've said that to you, I think, in the past too. Get rid of the cash thing. It doesn't make any sense. How is that fair to anybody?
So no, and I think that the specifics around certain policy proposals, that's a different conversation, because what I really want to get to, especially around this moment, is a lot of folks who before now have been precluded and excluded from the lawmaking progress, from the electoral process. A lot of those folks are now starting to bring their voices and their experiences to the table. And that's why when I did the introduction, and we all have the communities that we are a part of, the folks that we engage with. But there's a saying that the people closest to the problem need to also be the people in the room with the power and the decision-making power. And I think what we have to do as people of color, and as Black people specifically, is we have to liberate our own perspectives, because the reality is what white supremacy, and I want to revisit the comment that you made earlier, Ashley, because that's where we need to really start this conversation around white supremacy, the ideology and the concept of white supremacy, and what it actually does. And what I want folks to understand is a lot of folks who are the victims and who have to bear the burden and the consequences of these inappropriate procedures and these inappropriate legislative acts and these inappropriate policies have not had their voices heard and haven't been a part of the decision-making process. And so, I really want to start there, and I want to give you, the floor to open up, but just really, I want to just give this, context for just a second. I always make a differentiation between structural racism and institutional or systemic racism. And from my vantage point, structural racism is the objective. It is the overall outcome that is pursued, which we have a societal hierarchy where your race or your identity is the greatest predictor to determinant of where you will be in that hierarchy. We know that, going back to what you said, Danielle, racism has had a permanency to it. The fact that 400 years later, the great preponderance of people who look like most of us on this call right now are inescapably at the bottom of that hierarchy. Okay, that is the structural racist component, and institutional and systemic racism, both in practice and in policy, and the way systems are designed and operate, reinforce and produce or create that. And all of that's based on a mindset, an attitude, a worldview, a perspective that some people are inferior to others. Some people are not worthy to have their personhood acknowledged or represented, or to live in a society where they have the prospects and possibility to become all that they have the ability to be. So Ashley, I want you to talk from your vantage point about, white supremacy. You brought that term up, and it all really starts there. And I think getting at the sheriff's point, we can create laws and we can create policies, but at the end of the day, it's people's behaviors based on what they think and what they believe that we're ultimately victims of. Natalie talked about the surveillance. Danielle talked about proactive policing. That's discretionary. Someone made a conscious decision to execute their authority in a particular way based on what they think or believe, the assumptions that they hold. So Ashley, talk a little bit about white supremacy, why you use that term, and how you think we can move forward when it comes to, the attitudinal shifts and changes that we are going to also need in order to make headway against these problems. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Sorry. So I think when we talk about white supremacy, first we need to just identify what it is. We all throw that word around, and a lot of people, it's kind of disjointed. Folks in our community don't really know what it is, but it's really when one race thinks they're superior of another race. And we've seen that for the last 400 years, and we see it in every structure and fabric of our society. We can see it through redlining. We can see it through politics. We talk about redlining as if it's a thing of the past. Redlining is still happening today. And we can see that when we look at the neighborhoods we live in versus the neighborhoods that maybe our colleagues live in. We can see it when we talk about economic structures. We talk a lot about racial justice, but we can't have racial justice without having economic justice. They both go hand in hand, and we can't have one without the other. And I think for me as an organizer, and what I'm thinking about when I think about ways to dismantle this structure, I think about community education. A lot of folks in our community can't even reimagine what a community free of these structures look like. So I think it's a lot of education in our communities, but I also think it's people running for office. I work for the ACLU, but on the side, my hand is in campaign works. We just got Nicole Morris elected. I think it's finding people in our community who believe in the liberation of our people and what that looks like in every fabric, every system. That means politics, education, whatever. And we run those people and we get them elected. And we don't just get them elected, but we hold them accountable. And we identify the structures that are in place right now that are holding us down and choking us out. And we eradicate those structures. And we vote people out of office. I wanted to go back to this because it's really on my heart. When we talk about what the state of America is, I heard Todd Baxter mention Minneapolis. And what I want to make sure that we do is not mention Minneapolis as if it's a thing that's happening there and not a thing that's happening here. Because those things are also happening here. We see that in the Sylvan Simmons case. A police officer shot him 3 times in the back. He didn't get fired. He got assigned to another job investigating police misconduct. We see that with the 13-year-old kid. The officers just beat the crap out of him and broke his nose. And nobody is talking about it. And they had a mistaken identity. Nobody is talking about those things. So Minneapolis is not something that is happening in Minneapolis and we're standing in solidarity here. It is happening in Rochester, New York.
And this is, and I you know what, and I'm glad about, and I want to follow up with one thing, and I want to open this up to the group too. But now Ashley touched on some really important pieces here. There's a big difference between Minneapolis and Rochester. So you talked about electing people and holding them accountable. So the difference between Minneapolis and in Rochester, we have a Black mayor. We have a Black police chief. The majority of our school board is Black. The majority of our city council is Black. So, and I want to open this back up to the group here. We have Black leadership. So why has it not equated to? Because thank God, I mean, and I'm glad that the sheriff decided to be here with us today. We reached out to Black leadership. They declined to be here today. I want to hear from folks. So why has Black leadership in Rochester not equated to progress regarding structural and systemic racism? Natalie, did you want to?
I'd like to take this. I think because the reality of this situation is, in order for Black people to realize equality. In order for that to become a reality, in order for that to become a reality under the law, socially, economically, psychologically, in order for all of that to happen, it is going to require radical change. It is going to require money that to be given to people, to Black people. It is going to require radically shrinking and reimagining our law enforcement system. Every single structure we are questioning and talking about was erected for a white supremacist purpose. You can read Abraham Kendi. You can go back all the way to the 17th century. Think
One
about it,
second, Natalie,
yes.
Natalie, and I want to just, okay. We are well aware
Mhm.
of systemic, institutional, structural racism. I don't want us to litigate that all conversation. I want to get back to a specific question because we are having an open conversation. Ashley talked about electing Black leadership, holding them accountable. I posed a question to the group to say that Rochester is a community where the majority of its leaders are Black. I want to talk specifically about why Black leadership as a means has not gotten us to the changes that we're talking about here.
So
To the group.
Subscribing. Can I interject?
You can, please. Yep.
So subscribing to for lack of better terms, the white system, the Black leadership in our community are in elected roles, but not so much operating in their roles, meaning that a lot of the unions in this community control those offices. And we have to be real, as Danielle talked about the Locust Club and trying to make systemic change, and the Locust Club fighting it, and black leaders to us to tell us to our face, I'm with it too, but on front, once again, acting if they're not in support of it. I think a lot of times economics for Black folks that become educated, title driven, power, money, those things play a huge role in deciding factors and change in the Black community. I made it out. I don't want to ruffle no feathers, and I'm good where I'm at. And particularly in Rochester, it's unique because you said, as you stated, with those African Americans in those high places that can actually legislate change in our community are silent, and it's really scary to me because their silence can be deadly to advocacy work in this community, because they have the true power when you're talking about, like I said, legislation. And it's important that we see, as Ashley stated, those who are being silent and getting them out, because your job as a representative for the community is to have the best interests of the community at heart. And what we're seeing as this thing unfold is that 65 years ago, 70 years ago, men and women marched, fought, died for representation at the table, being elected representation at the table. And presently, we have the table, and because of a power structure that's outside of the table that we sit at, we bow to that power structure and allow that power structure to influence how we act, what we do, and if we really want to see change. It's very problematic in this community for Black leaders to be quiet, for a Black chief to not want to stand forward and be bold, and stand in truth and solidarity, not because of your title, but because of your kinship, because of your color, your ethnicity. I think that's important. And for instance, yesterday, as we marched to City Hall yesterday, when we got there, there was Black folks inside the building who didn't want to come out the building because they were told they can't come out the building, City Hall. And it's important that we see across the nation other leaders in solidarity, locking arms, saying not only what's happening across the nation, but in our community, we won't tolerate it no more. So we have to be deliberate on holding Black leaders accountable first, because having allies is great, but if you have Black folks in places that's not doing the job, then it is, as Ashley stated, it's time for them to go. So for me, I'm very deliberate on homing in on making sure those that represent me, particularly Black folks, are held at a higher standard based on, because I know your experiences are related in some way to mine.
Can I respond to that?
I really quick before, I want to go to Simeon for a second, because Simeon and I are both civic leaders in Rochester who try to move in the non-for-profit, social assistance, employer-based, philanthropic-based, sectors. And we try to build, efforts around collective action and the cooperation of various stakeholders to try to make inroads where legislation fails, where policy fails, or rather where it hurts. And Simeon, can you talk just a little bit about, how do you believe, first off, do you believe that there are failings? Yes or no? And how do you believe, inactions and actions taken by leadership affect your ability to do your job, as the Vice President of Community Programs at the Community Foundation? How do you believe that it affects your ability to do your job?
So I have the good fortune of being the father of a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old. And over the last a couple of years, I've watched my children come into racial consciousness. And as I alluded to at the outset of the call, one of the challenges that we have to deal with is that, again, this is not an interpersonal or individual, but we have major systemic failures, right? Sheriff Baxter talked a little bit about some of his sheriff deputies and some of the challenges of trying to legislate their hearts. We have to ask the question, where does that come from, right? And it's the cultural images, it's the milieu that we're all in that create this set of circumstances. And that's constantly perpetuated by the systems that are in place. I imagine that you have some of the folks that are watching right now that are taking exception to the notion of white supremacy, because they say to themselves, I'm white and I don't think I'm better than anyone. I imagine that you have some folks that are watching that say that, who don't fully appreciate that by dint of the systemic features that the very construct that exists, that you can't help but continue to perpetuate this same cycle. So as it relates to Black elected officials, I did a study some years back, and I looked at the campaign accounts. This is back in before I was kind of doing the work I do these days. I looked at campaign accounts for Black elected officials and their comparable white elected officials. And I'll tell you what I found. I found that on average, they had about 30% less in a given campaign account than their comparable white elected officials. That's number one. And then number two, when you looked at the sources of funds, the sources tended to be special interests, be they lobbyists. Some of them came from union dollars. Some of them came from those sources. I'll tell you what was not there by and large was a social network of people who just had the same ideological bent and contributed for no other reason than the fact that you and I were roommates in college, who contributed for no other reason than the fact that you and I were colleagues and friends. And the reason why that's important is that a lot of Black elected officials, because they exist, again, in this system, right, and not just as individuals, but because they exist in this system, then predicate their actions on trying to get re-elected, right? And getting re-elected means going to the aforementioned lobbyists and unions and so on and so forth, oftentimes at the expense of the very communities that they portend to represent. And so at this point, it's really, key that we start to talk about how we create systemic disruption. Otherwise, we're going to continue to get the same features, and we'll just be moving deck chairs on the Titanic. And there are a lot of different ways to kind of get at this. I know you said you didn't want to get too deep into specific policy proposals, but we can have a meaningful conversation about campaign finance reform, but in a different key and tone and register than the way that we typically talk about it. Because campaign finance reform is an equity issue too, right? We can have, some meaningful conversations in this community about how we, structure the electoral process itself. So many different days, so many different times, as opposed to one unified opportunity. That's an equity issue too. And I also just say, not for nothing, it should also be noted that because of the way the system operates, it's created widespread and very deep cynicism in our community. And that cynicism gets read as apathy, right? It gets read as, why won't these people come out and vote in their interests? Guess what? They are by staying home in a lot of cases because they don't see their interests represented in the bevy of elected officials that are running, be they white, black, or otherwise. And so it really is time for us to think again about these deep structural changes. How do we mobilize real people, right, for these changes? And one way to do that is, again, to go out and actually talk to real people. We have to actually get out there. I'll say this, I don't want to be long, but I do want to just point out that one of the dynamics in the past couple of weekends that I've noticed is this castigation of, quote, the looters, right? That, peaceful protest was good, but those looters, we've got to wag our fingers at them, not recognizing that the reason why we protest is because of the conditions that have created folks that were out looting. And even more than that, that the key to this community, right, our destiny is caught up in them, right? The very people that get erased and that get pushed to the margins. Because if you're serious about lower poverty, if you're serious about higher graduation rates, that's who we're talking about, right? And so in order for us to make meaningful change, it means that we have to actually get in touch, get engaged with. We can't pretend like we don't see them, like we can't ignore them, like we can't act like they're not there. We can't drive past in our cars comfortably, right? And one of the failings of our Black political system, I think our political system broadly speaking, and frankly, our nonprofit complex has been a meaningful engagement with the people that are most affected. And if we can't do that, I guarantee you that 10 years from now, we'll be doing the same thing that we're doing right here, having another webinar and another call to talk about these issues.
Mhm.
Ashley?
I want to go back to your question on why we have Black leadership but still have the same problems. So when we talk about white supremacy, it's entrenched in every system, including Black folks' minds, right? So we can't elect Black leaders who have not deconstructed what white supremacy is and actively work to dismantle it, and then expect them to do that when they get in office. We have Black leaders who still use the same tactics that white folks put in place, which inadvertently perpetuates white supremacy. It's like using the master's tools to dismantle the master's house. We can't do that. And that's what we see happening. So I think it's important. I always go back to that community education. We got to begin to have conversations with our own people about what oppression really looks like in our community, because people don't even know that they're being oppressed. I used to be an organizer for the Fight for 15 to get minimum wage for people who worked at fast food restaurants. And I cannot tell you how many people of color I talked to who did not think they deserved $15 an hour for working at a fast food joint. And we have so much dismantling to do in our minds and in our hearts that community education has to be at the forefront of this, because what we end up doing is electing Black people who perpetuate white supremacy by using the same tactics that white folks used against us and continue to use against us.
And you know what? And that is duly noted. I think the big question that I'm asking in a response to that is, because now we're getting into a territory where, to some degree, Black complicity becomes an extension of racism, and it's through misrepresentation, it's through poor leadership, it's through bystanding. And so, what does the standard become when evaluating if a person has an agenda? Because the way that I, listening to everyone talk, the way that I see this is, not only is this, are these matters of racial interest, but these are also matters of national purpose if we're talking about, advancing the timeline of progress that our forebears all fought for. So where does the standard become when evaluating, is someone prepared for leadership? Because when folks run, and this would just be a little pushback, When people run though, Ashley, they know what to say. They know what to propose. They know what to claim they're going to do. So where does the racism or the supremacy come in that though you were aware of what needs to happen, you were disabled in yourself to allow you to actually accomplish or pursue it or do it?
I think for me, when I work on campaigns, one thing that I do is like, we don't just listen to what people say, we follow the history of what they've done, right? Because people will never believe what you say, but they'll always believe what you do. And for me, I think of credible people that's on the ground doing the work, and what do they say about you, right? And then we have intense conversations, you know? When we think about people like Shawnee Mitchell, when we think about people like Nicole Morris, when we think about people like Melissa Baird, we sat down and had real hard conversations. What do you believe? What do you think is white supremacy? Why are you running for office? And I think I want to also say it's not just the offices, right? People have to have integrity, right? Because money and economics will have people saying one thing and doing the other. You know, I come to this work that I'm in, not because the money is great, but because I feel called to do this. I feel a burden and a weight to do this because of my community. And I would do it for free. And I think when we're talking about people running for office, we have to make sure that they have a history of integrity, that they have a history of liberation, that they have a history of not just dismantling white supremacy, but working in systems and actually doing what they say they're going to do.
Natalie, are you still on with us?
Yeah, I'm here. I have allergies, so I turned off my camera.
I wanted you to be able to chime in too. You know, and I think too, just really quick, because there's also been rhetoric around, you know, defunding the police. This has seemed to be the #1 demand of defunding the police. So when people say that, and I want Natalie to kind of take this one, what would that mean as a part of the criminal justice system? What would that mean? Defunding the police?
It means allocating the vast majority of resources that we give to law enforcement officers to deal with every social problem, be it somebody having a mental health crisis, be it an abusive interpersonal relationship, be that a bank robbery. We treat all of those problems with cages and guns like they're all bank robberies. And to support that, we have defunded mental health treatment, we have defunded housing programs, we have defunded food programs, we have defunded all of the programs that allocate resources to low income in this city, primarily Black people. We've allocated all those resources, created more scarcity, more poverty, more housing insecurity, fewer avenues for help for people who are suffering from mental illness. And we've taken all of that money and we've put it in the police department and we said, hey, deal with this. But we didn't tell the police department that we didn't want people, or I think we have, but that's not how, when you take all these problems, you defund all the resources and you give to the police department, they're not equipped to deal with these issues. They're not equipped to deal with mental health crises. They're not equipped to deal with domestic violence. They're not equipped to deal with interpersonal relationship issues and that don't need a cage and a gun as a response. What defunding the police looks like is taking the vast majority of resources that we have allocated. Again, law enforcement is the largest part of any municipal or state budget. It just is. Go look at the budget. Go look at how much we spend on law enforcement in this city, and look at how much we spend on housing assistance in this city, and then walk by the House of Mercy. It means taking the vast majority of that money and putting it towards actually addressing the root causes of our social issues. Be that secure housing for people who are struggling with mental illness, be that massive programs that help people dealing with domestic violence. Because what somebody who's dealing with domestic violence needs is safe housing to move to, financial assistance, a divorce, and they need their abuser to never be able to get a gun. Those are the things that they need. You'll ask any person who's experienced domestic violence, including myself, the police need nothing better. They showed up and they maybe got the person out of my house. but they didn't help me with any of the other things I needed to extricate myself from that situation. They also don't, when you treat violence with violence, you just increase the violence, you just increase the victimization of victims. We are not holistically treating our societal issues. We are brushing them under the jail. And that is a huge, huge, huge problem. We need to take the vast majority of that money and those resources and actually start helping people, actually start addressing the root causes of our societal issues. A large part of that is that we don't teach in schools. A lot of the problem we don't teach critical thinking and conflict resolution. We need to beef up programs. We need to teach young people how to negotiate social problems, how to deal with anger, how to deal with relationships that are not working. We also need to provide financial support so people aren't reliant on those kinds of connections to get by. I am the public defender who's assigned to human trafficking court. And, you know, human trafficking court is a better way to treat people who are find themselves unwillingly stuck in sex work. It's a much better way than traditional court, and there are now a lot more resources going to these women, but we needed those resources before they were unfortunately found themselves involved in sex work and being trafficked. And that's what we need. We need proactive programs to address these problems instead of waiting until they happen and sending a gun in a cage after them. That's what defunding the police should look like.
I want to just really quick, Simeon. Because I really want to get to the sheriff, and I apologize, you guys, because we're running short. We're running close on our time here. But if I'm hearing you correctly, Natalie, what you're getting at is we need to invest in preventative measures. We need to invest in preemptive and proactive measures that both retroactively deal with issues that have a historical origin and then that deal with the contemporary issues that exist in the present right now.
Yes.
And so, Sheriff, I want to get to you. So as a, going back to Danielle's earlier question about, people who are over institutions, when you hear, those proposals about dealing with issues of historical origin, dealing with the contemporary crises that exist right now, that to Natalie's point, we've decided as a society to criminalize those issues rather than trying to remediate them. When you look at certain budget lines that you have, like your special events budgets, your overtimes budgets, and any other kind of discretionary funds that you may have as an institution and realigning them, how do you respond to that first and foremost? And second, going back to your earlier point about employment, in Simeon's piece, who talked about this divestiture from the city and this reinvestment in suburban towns and villages, how do you believe you can enable Black women, Black men to potentially do some of that work and be compensated for it? Or, really looking at the retroactive resolutions and the contemporary resolutions to the social maladies that we've decided that were crimes rather than, societal issues that affect individuals, but ultimately they are not solely the product of someone's actions. More so, they were put in a situation where the conditions brought about the circumstance.
So I think, first of all, when we say terminology, and words are important, right? We're going to throw a gun in a cage at it. These are police officers being thrusted into environments that we are not designed to be into. I'm agreeing 100% with Natalie. We're asking law enforcement to do tasks that we're not designed to do. As an example, we make in the Monroe County Sheriff's Office, and I'm speaking on behalf of the city police department, we make, I think, I don't have the numbers right, but we make more mental hygiene transports, or what formerly known as mental hygiene arrests, than we make criminal arrests. We are going to call after call for mental health issues, and we try and work with Monroe County Mental Health and form these teams, but there's a huge societal problem there. And then a point in time in survey where almost 2/3 of the people inside the Monroe County Jail, point in time survey we did last year, 2 years ago now, almost 2/3 of those folks inside the Monroe County had a mental health transport or a diagnosis in their life. And I go back to the earlier statement, why are these folks, most of these folks, their criminality is based on their mental health condition, right? Or their poverty issues or things like that. So I cannot argue what Natalie's saying. when it becomes emotional in terminology like that, as opposed to let's sit down and see who can do it better than law enforcement and fill that gap in our society, being proactive in our society with some of these issues that end up in the criminal justice system. Domestic violence, again, a 22-year-old police officer responding to a domestic call. That domestic call has been building up and building up for, I've been there too in my personal life, right? That's been building up for years. That it finally gets to a flashpoint that 911's called because a neighbor hears something, or a kid gets on the phone, and we respond. And you got a 21-year-old, 23-year-old, 25-year-old police officer trying to figure out the solution to that problem in about an hour. And what can I do? And trying to make those referrals and the mandatory arrest procedures that we got to go. Natalie, I agree with you. There's things that law enforcement are doing right now in our society. So all I'm saying is take a step back. Let's look at, you can't just turn one on and one off, right? Or you can't turn one off and one on, because there's no one going to be holding down that gap that's going to be. And we think way back, I think way before Adrian was around. He's a young man, but I remember, the deinstitutionalize of mental health, right? And folks went out to the community, and that was a beautiful thought. But I don't think we thought that all the way through. Like, who's going to be on the receiving end? Where's all these non-government agencies and these nonprofits ready to receive these people, or the people that are going through societal problems now with poverty and ACE scores off the chart, right? Kids are growing up with ACE scores off the chart. And we haven't done a good enough job, and most of them end up in the lap of law enforcement. And we just look at the mental health transports day after day after day, and no one's grabbing onto these people and actually working on their mental health issues that's causing their criminality, if there's criminality at all. And most often they're transported to the hospital, and a couple hours later they're out. And then we see them again the next week. And then sooner or later there's a confrontation with police because they get violent, we get violent. And then there's a video. And like, man, we've been dealing with this guy for how many times? Where's the system to pick him up or pick her up and put him? So not disagreeing with Natalie on that point, that, we can look at more efficient ways to do things. We can look at more effective ways to do things, as opposed to asking police officers to solve some of the societal problems.
I have one quick, and I remember you had your hand up, Simeon, but I want to go back to Danielle, because I think Danielle, even in your opening remarks, you talked very specifically about speaking truth to power. You talked very specifically about when institutional, proposals are made at change. And I want to ask you this: do you believe this moment will be best addressed through negotiations and conversations in terms of progress meaning, incremental changes, piecemeal changes? Or do you think that this conversation will be best served by conversations that are had within terms of solutions?
Yeah, I'm mute again.
Okay. I called out Sheriff Baxter for bail reform, so I want to call him in for his response to defunding, because even if he doesn't like that word, I think a lot of what he said, we all are on the same page about. And that's really important to acknowledge. It lets me know that there is some hope for us to have these conversations. Obviously, I don't want it to be piecemeal. Obviously, here's the way I look at it. If I hire you to come do something in my house and I give you $100,000 to do whatever it might, maybe $100 to do whatever it might do, and you don't do it, guess what? I want my money back. So someone said this the other day, what the Black community is asking for is a refund, because what we see is that Mr. Baxter can tell you, people go in and out of the jail. It's just a revolving door. So you commit a petty larceny and the next day you commit another one. So we know the police are not stopping petty larcenies. We know the police are not stopping the possession of drugs. We know the police cannot stop the open air drug markets. We've been talking about that in Rochester for as long as I was alive. So why do we keep giving them the money to do that? This to me does not require a 10-year think tank. We already have the data. We have the data right now to look at what RPD is actually doing and whether it is effective. So we can act now. How we reallocate those sources, obviously, are conversations that we need to have. But, I really don't want to hear from our leadership, well, we're going to examine this over the next couple of years. There's nothing to examine. We have the data. It's not working. Cut it out. Give us our money back and let's move on to something that's more effective.
So I want to follow that up with this question. Where does that resolve? And I'm going to say that resolve absolutely and in total, okay? Alexander Hamilton's language, absolutely and in total, who does it begin with? I believe Anthony alluded earlier that in his mind, that begins with Black people. That begins with Black leadership. And I think his logic, and Anthony, you feel free to step in, how can you expect other people to see or acknowledge your personhood when you don't respect your personhood, or you won't acknowledge your personhood, or when you are not fully committed to the uplift and deconstruction of structural, institutional, internalized, and individualized racism? So for you, where does that resolve begin?
I mean, I think there's a hard truth that we do not have progressive Black leadership in Rochester. We have Black leadership, we don't have progressive Black leadership. The mayor just recently came out against defunding. I have not heard the chief's opinion on defunding, but I'm sure it's very much aligned with the mayor. But you know what? Every weekend, there's thousands of people marching to the street and demanding that this happens. And those are the people that I believe in. At the end of the day, the leadership, whether they're Black, white, doesn't matter, they have to respond to the demands of the people. And I can tell you that the people are not going to let up until we begin to see some real action and reallocating services. But just like Natalie and Ashley said, Black folks themselves internalize white supremacy. We can call it having a colonized mind. Harriet Tubman had to convince people to come up north and seek freedom. There were slaves who did not believe it was possible to leave the plantation. There were folks who didn't think Barack Obama could win. There have always been Black folks who have been stunted by a colonized mind, but that's okay, because there's 1,000 and more folks in Rochester of all different races who are ready to take it to the street. And I mean that peacefully because I'm a lawyer, but who are ready to protest and rally and demand a change. And if we can't get it that way, we'll get it with our vote. We'll get it with our tax dollars.
No, and that's right. And so I want to pose this question now to Ashley, who's been leading the protests. How do you plan on, transitioning the protests into progress?
So I think the protest is progress. I don't think that we can separate the two. And a good example of that is, Adrian, we've been fighting for 50A for at least 3 years. And when I tell you with zero traction, no traction at all whatsoever, we sat down with our local officials, we sat down with state local officials, and we have gotten no traction. 50A was just repealed a couple of days ago, and it is not lost on me that was repealed because of the action that is happening in the streets. So I don't think we can separate the two and say, how can we turn it into progress? I think they work simultaneously, and it is progress. Am I screaming? I'm sorry, I don't mean to scream.
No, you're fine. Simeon, what are give us some insights from you.
Yeah, I mean, just a couple of things. I think the difference these days is that we have enough access to get the information. And that's different than what was the case in the past. And we can do the math, right? And the math is for the city of Rochester, it's a $500 million budget, $97 million of which is spent with the police department. $4.5 million of that is spent on community affairs. We can do the math. For those that are, calculating with me, that's 4.5% of the police department's budget that's spent on community affairs. And then how do we define that community affairs work, right? So, the fact is that the numbers are pretty evident. I mean, it's pretty clear where the opportunity is. And there's a trope that's been going around this community for a long time, and particularly for the audience that we're kind of hanging with here today, that we are resource rich in this community and results poor. And that's actually, I don't know that that's true, right? And you say, Simeon, what makes you kind of suspect that? I'm watching the nonprofit infrastructure in this community crumble as a result of COVID-19. Because it's been grossly underfunded. And even it hasn't worked in ways that are optimal in terms of addressing the concerns of Black communities. And so the fact is that the notion of defunding the police and, use whatever terminology you like, is how do we drive dollars in ways that are ineffective to things that are effective? in the same way that all of your listeners today ask in their businesses, right? If you are selling something that does not work and does not sell, you do not continue to sell it, right? You change the business line, you spend more on R&D or whatever the case is to come up with something that works. And there's no reason why you should do anything different in this space. Last thing I'll say is there is an actual history in this community, right? There's an actual history, like things actually happened in Rochester that got us to this point. And it would behoove all of us to do the homework to understand some of the policy decisions and choices that were made along the way that got us here, to look for some of the clues for how we might actually remediate some of the problems that we're dealing with, right? We didn't nibble on the edges to get here. Wholesale, large change was made to get us here, right? Social engineering, there's a lot of people that decry social engineering. We got socially engineered into this problem with redlining and with restrictive covenants, amongst other things, right? And so if that worked to break it, then it seems to me that it's a reasonable sense that we can use some of those tools to fix it. And if we're not willing to take that kind of audacious, big, and bold change, again, I will say we will nibble on the edges, and in 10 years, we'll be right back here on another webinar having another conversation like this. And so again, the question is, do you want change or not? And if you don't pretend, right? If you don't, that's okay. Just say, I like it the way it is. But if you do want change, if you're tired of reading those headlines, the same thing over and over and over again, then join the movement. And you can do that even as a business person in the community with the kind of courage that's necessary.
So, I mean, obviously we're out of time, but I want to just say this. First off, thank you to everyone who took the time out to have this conversation today. This is literally just our first conversation. Just really helping folks understand across racial lines, socioeconomic lines, educational lines, what is really going on in areas that they don't come in contact with every day. And I want to congratulate Ashley, you and your organization and your stakeholder organizations who worked on repealing 50A. I did see that was repealed earlier this week. And I would love to talk about what you think that repeal is going to mean now as far as, improving the quality of policing that our communities are experiencing on a daily basis. But these are really big issues. And I just want to leave everyone with this. And this really goes to what you're saying, Simeon. This is not the time, I think, to operate within the framework of either permission or the framework of caring about someone else's perception or someone else's, because ultimately we are the ones who experience the brunt of this societal challenge that we all call and know as racism. And so I think that we need to be proactive and we need to be stern in what it's going to actually take to not just have our personhood acknowledged, but to also have our Americanness acknowledged, not in rhetoric, not in words, but in the prospects and possibilities of us becoming all that we have the ability to become and are willing to work towards becoming. And I just want to, Anthony, I'm sorry we couldn't get to see you, but I just want to thank you all. And it goes back to what you said, Simeon. At the end of the day, it's, do you want to see us really become the community we have the potential and possibility to become?
If folks want to do a little homework, because I think that was one of Sheriff Baxter's points, is that we actually have to do the work. Take a read of a book called The Color of Law. I would commit that to particularly this audience to understand with a little bit more specificity, again, how we got here, at least on a national level. And much of what happens, what he describes in that book was true here in Rochester.
Thank you,
The
Simeon.
Color of Law, Richard Rothstein.
Okay. All right. So thank you to all of our members for tuning in today. This is the first of many community conversations we're going to have to try to put Rochester on a path towards really becoming a community it has the potential to be for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.